International Day for Disaster Reduction is held each year on October 13th, which is today. And this day celebrates how people and communities around the world are reducing their exposure to disasters. Although hazards may be unpredictable, their impacts and outcomes need not be. The International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction is an opportunity to acknowledge the progress being made toward preventing and reducing disaster risk and losses in lives and livelihoods, economies, and basic infrastructure in line with the International Agreement for Reducing Global Disaster Risk and Losses. We now welcome Abdias Samuel, National Disaster Coordinator, and Andria Grosvenor, Acting Deputy Executive Director for the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CDEMA. Welcome to you both.
Welcome. Good morning, and I'm happy to be here with you, and congratulations on your 200th episode. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I need my pom-poms for this one.
Thank you very much. All right, so let's begin the conversation this way. Obviously, we're celebrating International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction today, and I would like to know how important this day is for your work as part of NEMA and as CDEMA, respectively. So, Mr. Samuel.
Great. Thank you so much for the question. And again, I want to thank you for having us. The International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction is a critical day for us to acknowledge, celebrate, and commemorate, because it plays into everything that we do. Every sector of society, whether it be socio or economic, and it also impacts the livelihoods of individuals. And therefore, we have to make sure that every single individual, no matter of your socioeconomic status, is informed, is aware, and knows the risk associated with their environments. What this will do at the end is save lives, and that's what we want to do, because one life lost will be one too many.
Ms. Wagner?
To be here. Thank you very much also for inviting CDEMA as the regional agency for oversight for disasters management in the Caribbean, and one of our participating states is Kitts Nevis. So we are really delighted to accept this invitation today. I do bring you greetings on behalf of our Executive Director, Ms. Elizabeth Riley, and she's also participating in a number of other events today to celebrate this day. So we celebrate this day because we have the CDM strategy for the region, the Comprehensive Disaster Management Approach, which is really an integrated approach to disaster risk management. It addresses all hazards, all phases of the disaster management cycle, so we're not just responding, and it involves all peoples of society. And that is the private sector, the public sector, and obviously the individual person at the community level. And the goal of CDM is really to have more resilient and sustainable CDEMA participating states through this comprehensive disaster management approach. So saving lives and livelihoods is an important dimension, or the important overarching goal that we have with CDM. And therefore, this focus on early warning systems for the International Day for Disaster Reduction is really about that. It's really about saving lives. It's really about saving livelihoods where people have made significant investments because they have their development aspirations. And it is in keeping with the priority area under the CDM strategy, which is community resilience. This is where we treat with the matter of early warning, getting those messages down to those people who need it most so that they can take early action, save their lives, save their loved ones, and their assets that they will generally also want to protect.
All right, and that is great advice, and indeed it is. So Abdias, we're going to start with you. How is NEMA working towards reducing the exposures of disaster, both in St. Kitts and Nevis?
I want to just piggyback. I felt that question coming. I want to piggyback on what Andria just said, is that St. Kitts and Nevis as part of the CDEMA member states, we have adopted the CDM strategy, which is the all-hazard approach. So once ago, we were just centric to hurricane, and we were mainly in the responsive phase. A hurricane happens, hey, we respond. We provide shelter, we provide relief supplies, and get people back to work and get persons assisted. Now we have the comprehensive disaster management strategy, which means a more comprehensive approach in terms of mitigation, prevention, giving more attention to that area, and enhancing the response capabilities, and also looking at the recovery strategies, building back better, looking at our building codes, our infrastructure, and also the recovery process in terms we have short-term, long-term recovery. So St. Kitts and Nevis has been doing significant work in strengthening our policies. We want to also focus on revamping our regulation, our laws. We want to continue our sectorial partnership with the different sectors to enhance policies, create MOUs, Memorandum of Understanding between each other, and also to continue to build on what is there, the baseline that is there. What do I mean by that? To ensure that we put significant focus on economic resilience. As a small island developing state, how do we strengthen our biggest contributor to the GDP of St. Kitts and Nevis, which is the tourism sector? And also, how do we enhance the public sector, which is, for now, one of the largest employers of St. Kitts and Nevis? So, Andria will speak to the roadmap for resilience that CDEMA has put out there for the member states, which we too have endorsed and adopted, and that is what we want to do for St. Kitts and Nevis, strengthening economies, strengthening the vulnerable groups, to make sure that we are keeping with the international standards. For example, we call them displaced persons, no longer you call them illegal aliens. We have to make sure that we collaborate with the international bodies such as the IOM, International Office for Migration, so that these persons who are displaced by other civil conflicts, by climate change impact, or by other situations, that they themselves who are here in St. Kitts and Nevis and are left out. Economy, we must build a resilient economy. If we don't have a resilient economy that provides jobs for our citizens, that in itself can become a disastrous situation for us. So that too, we have to mitigate the risk of that, because there are many fall-offs from that. We also want to strengthen institutional capacities and knowledge of individuals to ensure that there is proper budgetary allocation for persons to respond to, prepare for and respond to risk associated with the environment and the general environment of St. Kitts and Nevis. For example, strengthening our ports of entry, strengthening our agricultural sector so that we could have a robust food security program to ensure that if our supply chains are interrupted, then we must have redundancies to ensure that people can continue to receive the basic essentials of life. We want to build strong communication ties with our telecommunications providers, and with your permission, I want to take this opportunity of thanking the cable in particular, Flow and Digicel, for coming on board this particular day today, providing significant support with the theme, which is early warning for all. That's the tagline for today, providing early warning for all, because that's what we want to do. So we're also working with the vulnerable groups, the Association for Disabled Persons, to ensure that they too are involved in the process of creating policies and procedure, and they too are involved in receiving these messages. So we are collaborating with all of society. I also want to thank the Chamber of Industry and Commerce. They have been rather active to ensure that their membership too do their part in terms of also investing in early warning system, investing in plans such as business continuity plans, what we call BCPs, and also sharing their technical expertise with NEMA and the government by extension to ensure that we build a resilient and robust St. Kitts and Nevis. And lastly, what we also want to look at, how do we build stronger infrastructure? For example, we see that the enhancement that has been done on Old Road, that is one of the resilient infrastructures that we have lauded here in St. Kitts and Nevis. Also, one of the things that we are looking into encouraging the government to look at is our waterways interface with our road network. So when we have heavy rains,
Yes.
the guts as we call them, they have a problem. One of the plans and suggestions being recommended is to divert some of those waters under the road. And we have seen some projects like that happening, in particular in Crown. So no longer when the guts running, you have to stop and wait for hours or look for alternative ways to move, but rather now you can just safely pass with the assurance that you will not be affected or impacted. So these are some of the things that we are looking into in terms of structural and non-structural activities, in terms of plans and policies, as well as the physical infrastructure for St. Kitts and Nevis.
All right, so Ms. Grosvenor, I noticed that you seem to be endorsing a lot of what Mr. Samuel had to say concerning this. All right, so in terms of economic resilience, because Mr. Samuel actually said that you would speak to that, what can you tell us in terms of not only a definition, but what it means on the ground for us here in Caribbean states?
Okay, thank you so much. So we talked about the CDM strategy and its goal of safer, more resilient, and sustainable participating states. And within the strategy, we actually have 4 pillars for our priority areas that we identify: institutional strengthening, knowledge management, mainstreaming the CDM approach into key priority sectors, as Mr. Samuels talked about tourism being one of those key sectors, and also looking at community resilience. So we have to ensure that our communities are safe, they are strong, and that they are able to address the multiple threats that they face and still be resilient. But what we noticed is that in 2017, everybody remembers 2017, we had Hurricanes Irma, we had Hurricanes Maria, but we also had Jose, and Jose had also threatened. So in 2 weeks, we had 3 Category 5 hurricanes which threatened our participating states, and that was quite unprecedented. But when we had 2017 and then we had 2019, we had Dorian affecting the Bahamas, and then in the last few years, we have been dealing with the pandemic and other hazards. So we have hazards that are occurring concurrently and with cascading effects. Interestingly enough, following 2017, though, I think that the CARICOM heads of government, like they had an insight probably into what may be coming into the future, because they did ask CDEMA to redefine resilience. And we took the traditional approach about, being able to bounce. Well, the concept was about bouncing back better, etc. But really, we want, as we talk about resilience, we really want to thrive in the midst of adversity. We want to be able to reduce the susceptibility to being impacted by the same hazard, but we also want to be able to use our threats as an opportunity to launch forward, to bounce forward, and to do better. So in 2018, the heads of government of the Caribbean community did endorse the resilience pathway to achieving comprehensive disaster management. And in that pathway, they identified 5 pillars where they indicated that if we were to focus on these, it would help us to achieve that overall goal of CDM, which is a safer, more resilient, and sustainable states. And these 5 pillars were as follows. We had social protection for the marginal and the most vulnerable. And this is important because we do have among us people who are very vulnerable, who can be impacted. They're people who are on the margins of the poverty, and with one shot, they fall below the poverty line. And we saw that with COVID-19 between 2020 and 2022. And so we have had to look at what are the social protection mechanisms that we have, whether it's welfare assistance, whether it's cash grants, whether it's food, whether it's assistance with education, to really be able to assist those who are the most vulnerable among us, but also those who are marginal, who fall below those poverty lines because of shocks. The other area was on safeguarding infrastructure. And we know that we have sometimes one port, one airport. We've had repeated losses of some of our infrastructure. We know the impacts that has happened in St. Kitts Nevis with Port Zant. And we also know that we have those experiences across the Caribbean region as well. So, and then communications is absolutely critical. And I know that Mr. Samuels mentioned this. So how do we safeguard our infrastructure that there are not, we don't lose our ports and our airports and our buildings when a disaster, when a hazard strikes, because losing them is really a disaster. So safeguarding that infrastructure. So as Mr. Samuels talked about, how do we look at our building codes? How do we ensure that we are enforcing those building codes? And how do, even at the level of the persons in your communities, the homeowners, having that that their homes safe is absolutely critical as well. And we are also doing some work now at CDEMA to strengthen that for our homeowners. But enhancing economic opportunity, the reality is that we want to thrive as a Caribbean society. That's the third pillar in enhancing economic opportunity. We want to thrive as Caribbean societies. But in order to thrive, if we are to have, like for instance, a successful tourism sector, if we are going to have a successful agricultural productive sector, and even if we are going to be able to deal with, like for instance, the financial sector, we have to manage our risk. So for the financial sector,
yes, please go ahead.
yes. So by the financial sector, we have to manage those risks, those security risks, cybersecurity risks, for instance. We have to be able to manage the risk to the environment with the tourism sector. For instance, we also have to preserve our environment as well as it relates to agriculture. So this, as we manage our risk, we are able to thrive economically, but then we are also able to open life chances within our education sector for persons that they can participate in the economy and not necessarily be on the sidelines. And so these are things that we are emphasizing. And I'll just mention the two other areas quickly. Environmental protection, I've sort of highlighted that. We need to be able to ensure that we protect our rivers, we don't dumping them, that we are able to protect our slopes, the way how we cultivate on our slopes, and that we have the trees that provide the cover, etc. One of the things even about this theme about early warning for the International Disaster Day for Risk Reduction is that we need to understand that there are challenges with how we manage our slopes that really affects even if we give warning. We know that if we don't train our rivers, or if we don't protect our slopes, that we can have exacerbated conditions that people have to be affected by. And the
Ms.
final
Wilson,
areas are response and
yes.
recovery.
We
Yes.
have roughly 30 seconds. I so hate to do this. If you can mention the final area really quickly.
Yes, pretty. The final areas are response and recovery, and why we recognize that we can be impacted by a number of hazards. Climate change is exacerbating hazards, so we need to be able to have a response mechanism, and through our regional response mechanism, we are able to affect states collectively as a region. And finally, on recovery, because we have to be able to recover and to bounce forward and bounce back better, even from the impacts that we have. So that was the final area of the resilience pathway.